On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1963. We're going to be taking a look at Sam Cooke, and he's going to be performing Twistin the Night Away. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So let's get Sam up on screen, and we'll probably watch this all the way through because it's just under 3 minutes in length, and then we'll jump into the analysis afterwards. But let's see how Sam and the full band get on.
Let me tell you about a place somewhere from New York way, all where people are so gay, twisting the night away. And man, they have a lot of fun. They're putting trouble on the run. Man, you find old and young twisting the night away. They're twisting, and everybody's feeling great. They're twisting the night. Let me tell you about it. Here's the man in evening clothes. How he got here, I don't know, but man, you ought to see him go, twisting the night away. He's dancing with the chicken slacks. The chicks are moving up and back. Oh man, there ain't nothing like twisting the night away. They're twisting. Everybody's feeling great. They're twisting the night. Let's twist a while. Yeah. Everybody's still all right. Would you put your hands together for me? Go on. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, make me feel good. Huh. Oh, yeah. Up there. Put your hands together if you feel all right for me, huh? Up there. Oh! Straighten it out. Here we go, twisting the night. Let me tell you about it. Here's a fella in blue jeans, dancing with the older queen. Chick doll up in a diamond ring, twisting that make me feel good. Ha! And man, you ought to see her go. Chick twisting through the rock and roll. Oh, here you find the young and old, twisting the night away. Twisting. Man, everybody's feeling great. They're twisting. Some fella just brought out a song and said, "Come on, baby, let's do that twist." I like that. Come on, baby, and let's do that twist. Yeah. Let me take you by your hand, and it goes like this. All you got to do is go round. I like it. I love to go round. Feels good to go round. I like to go round. I got to go round. Swing it, fellas. I love to go round. I like to go round. I love to go round. I got to go round. Feel good, huh?
And there we have it. As always, the link to this video is going to be in the description below, so you guys can click on that link to watch it over and over again. This kind of performance in the late 50s and the 60s just seemed to be the norm because you had such a great big band sound going on, and these performers, Sam Cooke is a great example of someone that could keep you interested the whole time, but also just keep you captivated by a performance. When we do analyze this and look at what's going on, you've got a guy who is always going to be the focal point in the middle of the stage with the spotlight on him, and very much the band in these kind of performances at this time were secondary. Even though you get an amazing band sound, it was always set up for the voice to be that focal point, and we've got that here. So it means that when the band does go off into an instrumental section, the singer could look really awkward because they're not doing anything. They haven't got a vocal that they can sing. But guys like Sam Cooke were such natural entertainers, it meant that you were just as engaged during the instrumental sections as you are when they're singing. It means that anything that vocalist is doing is going to be the center of attention, but also the vocals are going to be so upfront and really take over the whole performance. So if it's a bad vocal, then there is nowhere to hide here. We haven't got loads of reverb or delay on the microphone. It is as dry as you like. And I know that this is an old recording, so it means that it isn't the clearest, but it is the clearest in the way of hearing Sam's voice, because if he wasn't pitch perfect, if he didn't have perfect control of his vocal cords, then there's no way that this would be as good as it is. It's just the fact that he's got the luxury of the entertainment and everything else that he can do whilst providing a faultless vocal. Focusing on the elements of showmanship and the way that Sam here covers the whole stage, which means that he's including the whole audience and interacting with them. The other thing, he actually talks to the crowd while he's singing in between vocal phrases, but also during those instrumental sections, getting them to clap along as well. So he's bringing the crowd on stage with him, giving the performance a community feel, like everybody is involved in it. And just walking down that center aisle of the stage, just bringing himself closer to the crowd means that it gives the performance a totally different dimension. Imagine if it just stood at the back of the stage here at the top of the steps and not come out and engaged with people. It would be like listening to somebody sing and watching a performance with an invisible wall there. And sometimes you do get that impression with some vocalists, especially who don't play an instrument. They can seem like they're hiding at the back of the stage because they don't really want to come to the front of the stage. They're not confident enough, whereas Sam Cooke never had that problem. And if anything, he just looks like he could sing on that stage all night, and he just loved being up there. So we've got the entertainment side of things, but it is paired with a fantastic vocal. And just for reference, range-wise, we are sitting in and around F4 here. We do go up to an A flat 4, so we're up there in the tenor range. That is going to be the peak of the mountain. At the end of the song is that A flat 4 that Sam hits in full chest voice. And the great thing about Sam's vocal was that he had this connected sound all the way through his range. And when I say that, I am going to give you guys an example, because he'd have little throwaway lines that he put in there, which you won't necessarily notice unless they're pointed out, because he's covering 2 or 3 notes very quickly. And the thing about the notes that he's covering is that generally, guys, in the pitch that he's singing, it tends to flip. You have this flip in your voice from chest voice into head voice, and sometimes vocal coaches refer to it as the break in the voice when you're transitioning through your vocal registers. So I've cued the video back just to give you guys an example of this. We're going to be listening to the line, "Here's a man in evening clothes," and listen out to the word clothes, and more specifically, the way that Sam just ends that word with 3 separate notes that he just quickly throws in there. Again, blink and you'll miss it, but they are spot on pitch-wise, and it is so relaxed the way that he blends his chest with his head register.
Here's the man in evening clothes.
And there it is. And what will happen with a lot of guys that sing is they'll have a vocal break exactly where this happens. So it means that when they might be singing an E4 or an F4, as soon as you start pushing a little bit higher, the vocal cords will want to go into head voice, they'll flip over, or you'll break over into falsetto, so the note isn't consistent. Whereas with Sam, you don't hear a vocal break because he's got that consistency throughout his range. I did say blink and you'll miss it. What I'm going to do is slow it down so you guys can maybe hear those 3 notes more clearly because they're covered so quickly. But let's have a listen.
Here's the man in evening clothes.
Right at the end of the line there. So we've got close. There's 3 notes going on, but they're so fast and they are connected. Sam doesn't go close and break off because he can't get into his next register. It's that smooth ascension of close and being able to go through his registers so faultlessly. The other thing is, it's the tone, the control, the fact that when Sam sings that phrase, He's just going into a very light head voice sound, but he's not flipping over. He doesn't allow that break to happen, but it's totally controlled and spot on pitch-wise. He also gets that hint of rasp to his sound when he leans into that chest voice, especially in the upper range. So when he is hitting an A-flat 4, for example, when he just leans on his diaphragm a little bit more, that's where that hint of rasp comes in. I also want to mention the fact that Sam Cooke and Little Richard were on the same record label, and there is a similarity in the way that they apply their vocal stylizations, and being this soul sound, you do tend to get that throwaway at the end of a vocal phrase that we've just looked at. And Little Richard did that as well. Covered a couple of notes, maybe 3 notes, sometimes even more, with a little run at the end of a vocal line. But the thing about Sam Cooke is that the record label wanted him to be another Little Richard because they're on the record label at the same time. And this is Speciality Records, by the way, for reference. But Sam didn't want to do that. As you can see here, he's in his element with the big band and just being the focus of attention with a microphone, and that's it. But I do want to cover a bit of Sam's history and career in this video as well. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, but there is a lot to cover, and everything surrounding his death as well that is a little controversial, and you've got different conspiracy theories going around, so we'll cover that a little bit as well. So Sam went to school at Wendell Phillips Academy High School in Chicago, and there might be something in the water there because 12 years earlier there was a kid from that school who was called Nathaniel Coles and went on to be known as Nat King Cole. But he was the 5th of 8 children. He used to sing with his siblings as well at the age of 8. At the age of 14, he became the lead singer of the Highway QCs, and he also befriended his neighbor by the name of Lou Rawls, and they also sang in rival gospel groups. In 1950, Sam replaced R.H. Harris as the lead singer in the Soul Stirrers, and they were already signed to Speciality Records. So they were bringing gospel music to a younger generation, and as you can imagine, whenever Sam would perform, the girls would run straight to the front of the stage, and given the performance that we've just witnessed, we can see how engaging and entertaining he was. It was in 1956 that Sam released his first solo song, and this is called Lovable, but he used the alias Dale Cook because he didn't want to alienate the gospel fans that he had previously, because generally back in the day, anyone singing secular music or music not made for the church were frowned upon, but that definitely was not the case in Sam's case. Understandably, the record label then said that Sam could use his own name for future releases, and his producer, Bumps Blackwell, was working on this different sound, and this is where the record label wanted Sam to sound like Little Richard, but then Sam and Bumps Blackwell didn't want to have that sound, so they left the record label at that point. So moving forward, Sam received a lot of support from his father, who was a pastor, and considering the music that he was performing, this must have surprised him, but it meant that it gave him a chance to make a new start, but also gave him the confidence to push on in the music industry. And at this point is when Sam added an E to the end of his name to signify that new start. And in 1957, he appeared on The Guy Mitchell Show. He also signed with Keane Records at that point, and then released his first song, You Send Me, and that was a massive hit. It got to number 1 in the R&B charts, stayed there for 6 weeks, and it also got to number 1 in the mainstream charts, and it stayed there for 3 weeks. In 1958, he performed at the Cavalcade of Jazz concert, and also performing there were Little Willie John, Sammy Davis Jr., Ray Charles, so he was certainly getting a lot of exposure at that point. This was the same year that he was involved in quite a serious car accident. The driver was killed, and he and Lou Rawls and Cliff White as well were hospitalized, but fortunately did recover. In 1960, he released Chain Gang, and this got to number 2 in the charts. He also set up his own record label called SAR Records, and this is something that a lot of people around at the time weren't doing. He was so switched on from a business perspective as well as a musical perspective, and he also set up a publishing company. But the record label that he did set up, he didn't sign himself to that. He signed with RCA Victor and then signed other bands and artists to his record label. More hits would follow, including this, Twistin the Night Away in 1962, even though this performance is from 1963. And he also was a songwriter. He wrote most of the songs that he performed, as well as overseeing the arrangements. So he was heavily involved in the writing process as a whole. Also, in 1963, he released Nightbeat, and that was a blues album. And then following in 1964, Ain't That Good News, which was his most critically acclaimed album. Sam signed Alan Klein to manage the publishing company and the record label, and he was the kind of guy that didn't take any messing around from anyone and really fought for the artist's rights. So they set up a holding company called Tracy Limited, and Tracy Limited owned all of Sam's music, and they worked out a deal with RCA Victor, where RCA Victor could distribute the music exclusively in exchange for 6% in royalty payments and also payments for recording sessions. So Sam was especially switched on about the ownership of his music and making sure that he kept the rights to it himself. So in the first year with Tracy Limited, rather than pay himself a salary, he took shares in Tracy Limited as a company just because of tax reasons. And then in the second year, he was forwarded $100,000, and in the third year, he was forwarded the same amount, and then in the fourth and the fifth year was $75,000 each. He was massively popular, and he had 30 top 40 hits between 1957 and 1964, and some of those were A Change Is Gonna Come, Wonderful World, Cupid, and Twistin the Night Away, the song that we've just seen, and that also turned into a huge album for Sam. Sadly, in 1964 is when Sam was shot and killed, and I am going to cover his death briefly because there are different people who believe different things, and there was a court case, and it was all sorted out in the courts, but then other things came to light after the event. But anyway, Sam had been to a restaurant with a lady by the name of Eliza Boyer, and he and Eliza went to a motel, and according to Eliza, she was forced to go to the motel and she thought that she was going to be raped. So when she was in the room with Sam, she tried to get into the bathroom, but then found that she couldn't get out of the bathroom because the window was shut, and it was shut and she couldn't open it. So she came back into the room, and then Sam went to the toilet, at which point she grabbed all of her clothes and Sam's clothes and run out. And when Sam then came out, he saw that all of his clothes were gone, so he went running out as well. But Eliza had run off. She tried to go to reception, but then she couldn't get in, so she ran off. And Sam didn't know where she was, so he ran to reception, and he was banging on the door, and apparently he was saying, "Where's the girl?" And I think he'd had a bit to drink. So Bertha Franklin was the woman on reception that night, and Sam managed to force his way into the door and then started to grapple with Bertha. So Bertha said that she then could get free or manage to break free. She went and grabbed a gun and shot him in the chest, and it was found, or at least judged to be, self-defense. So that was the court ruling. There are so many things here that people have looked at and said, well, why did Eliza grab all of her clothes and Sam's clothes? Maybe she was trying to rob Sam and waited until he was in the toilet, and that's why she took all of his clothes. By the way, when Sam went down to reception, he was naked apart from a jacket and one shoe. So he was literally shot in the chest when he had nothing on him, but it was still just classed as self-defense. The other thing is that a year later, it was found, or Eliza was found and charged for prostitution, but it was found to be entrapment. So she was released without charge after that arrest. There were also reports from people earlier that night in the restaurant saying that they saw Sam with a lot of money on him, even though when his body was searched and his wallet was searched after his death, there wasn't a lot of money found. But you can understand why people say that Eliza maybe waited until Sam was in the toilet and then stole everything, including his clothes, thinking that his wallet was in there as well. But there is another chapter to the story, because Bertha had to quit her job at the motel because she was receiving death threats from people who weren't happy with the way that she dealt with Sam on that night. And she sued Sam Cooke's estate for $200,000, and she cited mental anguish and physical injuries, and Barbara Womack, who was Sam's widow, countersued for funeral costs. Anyway, Eliza came into court to provide testimony, and Bertha won that case. And she was awarded $30,000, so not the $200,000 that she was asking for. And the final twist in the story is that in 1979, Eliza was arrested again and was charged with the second-degree murder of her boyfriend, of which she was found guilty and was sent to jail for 25 years. And this then fueled the conspiracy theories all over again in 1979. So a very sad and controversial end to the story and Sam's life at the age of only 33. But thankfully, we've got these live videos that we can look back at and get an appreciation of his ability on stage to entertain, but also that clean vocal tone that he had. And with such a clean vocal sound here, there is nothing on this microphone, but he is so dead on pitch-wise, and it gives you such an appreciation of his vocal ability all round. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!